You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret Wyatt,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is Matthew Farrell. Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. I'll be talking more about her as the month goes on. Mindy Tarquini. Mindy has been a guest on the show a couple of times, and there's some links down in the show notes to her past episodes. I'd like to tell you about her book, The Infinite Now. She was on the show last year to talk about it. This book is mind-blowing and amazing. It was a 2017 Today Show Winter Book Selection 2017 winner of the USA Best Book Awards. In flu-ravaged Philadelphia, a young immigrant struggles to learn the intricacies of time-bending, teamwork, and living in a world which seems as hell-bent on breaking her spirit as she is to keep it. This is not your mother's historical fiction. Kirkus calls The Infinite Now a well-woven tapestry of history, character, and charming mystery. BuzzFeed called it a masterpiece. The Historical Novel Society says Tarquini uses words like a composer. School Library Journal said The Infinite Now is historical fiction portrayed in a new way and declared it a title not to be missed. Do not miss this book. There's a link to it in the show notes at hankgarner.com. I'd also like to thank editor Ellen Campbell for sponsoring the show. Ellen has been a faithful sponsor of the show for quite some time, and she's an editor that I have used. She's someone that I trust. When you're writing a story, you need someone that can have that critical eye that helps your words be better, yet still retain what you meant. That's what a great editor does. She helps you to tell your story the best way possible. Ellen can do that for you. Find her at ellencampbelledits.com. ellencampbelledits.com. Thank you, Ellen, for sponsoring the show. I'd also like to thank Ernest Dempsey for sponsoring the show. Ernest writes a series of books, among others, called the Shawn Wyatt Adventure Series. I got to be friends with Ernest because I had him on the show last year because I discovered his books as a reader. And these are some of the best mystery, conspiracy theory books that I had found in quite a while. His newest book is called The Templar Curse. It's been out since the spring, and there's a brand new one coming soon. There are 15 books in this series, and this is one of my all-time favorite series. And Ernest is a really nice guy as well. He's one of those writers that you love his work, and you love him too. Check out the series in the show notes. The Shawn Wyatt Adventure Series by Ernest Dempsey. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Matthew Farrell on the show with me. Matthew has a fantastic new book, and it's called What Have You Done? And this book is one of those that you can't put it down, and you kind of hate yourself for not putting it down because it scares the bejesus out of you. And but it's one of those books that you just love to torture yourself with. Welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you. Before we get into talking about the book and all the good stuff we're going to talk about, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So I would probably say, I was probably in 4th or 5th grade. My mother was a huge Stephen King, Coons fan, horror movie fan. So we kind of grew up with all that stuff in the house. And I remember handwriting kind of copycat Friday the 13th type stories that I would then hand to my mother, and she'd be good enough to type them out on the old school typewriter. And I'd keep a little collection. But I've always kind of had writing in me. Began to take it seriously when I graduated high school. But, all throughout my life, I was always writing it always kind of just came to me, craft a story here or there and kind of develop from there.
That's awesome. So your parents were supportive of the thing that you were interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. Very supportive. My mom is an avid reader, and that rubbed off on all of us in the family. And we became big readers. And, I'm a true believer that you can't really kind of understand the craft of writing unless you're reading a lot. And it helps map out not only what the current market is, but just, it expands your vocabulary, teaches you sentence structure and how pacing works in a story and whatnot. So we've always been big readers in our family, and they've always been really supportive of the writing side as well.
Yeah, you have to read a lot to understand. You can try, but until you have that vocabulary, so to speak, to draw from, and we're talking vocabulary more than just a literal vocabulary, but understanding what works and what doesn't work. And, you can only do that by immersing yourself in other people's work and then trying it for yourself.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
So, you were a fan of horror and suspense, early on?
Yeah. I always tell a funny story. My mother bought me, Stephen King's, I believe it was Skeleton Crew. And I was in the 6th grade. She got it for me for Christmas, and I brought it to school with me for our reading. We had a half-hour reading time every day. I brought it to school, and it was a Catholic school. And, the teacher came up to me and said, "Does your mother know that you're reading this book?" And I opened to the first page, and it was an inscription from my mother. I was like, "Yes." Yeah, we kind of, we grew up with it. My kids are growing up with it. I curse myself for not having seen the new Halloween reboot on its opening weekend, but my schedule got in the way, so I'll be there next weekend with the family. But, yeah, horror, suspense, thrillers, they've all kind of been in my DNA throughout.
That's amazing. Did you ever have a conversation with your mother about those kinds of books and why you love it and why it's a family thing for you? Like I had the complete opposite upbringing, where everything was evil and you just didn't do that. And then, as you get older, you start, reading things and then starting to appreciate things, and you realize that horror and suspense are really so much more than just the cheap scare. Like there's something about it that's almost necessary for the human experience. Did you ever have family talks about that and about why those kinds of stories work and what you get out of them?
No, we've never talked about it, and I think it's just because it's always just been part of our lives. There's nothing, you don't really talk about why the sky is blue. The sky is just blue. And, so I think that was kind of, horror and thrillers and suspense has just always kind of been part of our upbringing in terms of entertainment. But I can say that I think personally, a lot of that has to do with, you kind of write about what makes you nervous or what you're scared about most as kind of a way to control it. And I've always felt that way. The things that my characters go through, whether it's a scare or it's a murder investigation or something like that, it's kind of the way I would see things playing out if I had control over, a murder investigation, or if I was trapped in the woods and there was a slasher coming after me or something. It kind of gives you control over something that, in reality, we have no control over. We don't know what's going to happen to us, when we end this interview. But, if we can write through some fiction that will allow us to kind of get control of that, I think that helps a lot in our psyche.
Those early stories that you were writing, and that your mother would type for you, what kinds of stories were those?
Oh, total ripoffs of like, Friday the 13th or Halloween or anything like that. And then, as I got older, I started writing more I would say still had that horror bent to it, but more steeped in reality, kind of like what you'd see out of a Stephen King or something. And then as I got even more serious about it, I really took a liking to the police procedural thriller aspect of the genre. My father was a police officer, and I grew up, surrounded by, police officer extended family. So I knew their personalities, the mannerisms of cops, the way things are looked at, from the perspective of law enforcement. And, adding that element in with the thriller piece of it has kind of been like my little niche in the market, where my books are, half police procedural, half psychological thriller. And it's worked really well. The stories are pacing very well. The public seem to love it. The readers seem to love it. And, so I pull from kind of that upbringing from my mother's side, from the horror thriller aspect of entertainment, from my father's side, from, being a police officer. And it's worked out really well.
Nice. I always like to talk about that early story DNA, and see how that tends to come full circle, and those initial influences and inspirations tend to kind of hang around with us all through our writing careers and resurface, and whatever those early influences just don't ever seem to leave.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was so it happened in 1980, so I was 7. My father got shot in the line of duty, and he ended up fine. He was okay, but that stayed with me subconsciously throughout. And I didn't notice it until very, very recently, but in a lot of the stories that I tell, the father is either, he either died early on in the story, or he's not around, or something like that, where the father's gone. And someone else pointed this out to me, that all my stories that or a lot of my stories that happens. And I said, I think that's something in my subconscious playing the what if game based on what happened to my dad, in 1980. So it's funny how that stuff surfaces and you don't even know it.
Exactly. Matthew, we know that you were immersed in stories from when you're very young, and that it manifested pretty quickly in you that this was something you were going to do, that you were a storyteller. And then you as we do, I think you're born storytellers. I think you work on your writing and you become an author, through working on the craft that you're born with. At what point, did you realize that this was something you were going to pursue professionally? And what have you been doing in the meantime? Very few people, go to college with the ambition to be a writer, study that, and never do anything else. Most of us, go out and pay bills and do other stuff while we're working on it. What have you been up to, and when did you realize this was going to be a profession for you?
So I knew that writing was always part of my life. I realized I wanted to, kind of go the professional route and try to make the dream come true, probably in my early 20s. But at the same time, I knew without a doubt how difficult that was to achieve that goal. So, there was never a question that I would do that full time. I always knew that I would have a day job until, I got to the point where I was published and hopefully could make a career out of it. Back when I started, self-publishing wasn't even a thing. So it was kind of you make it or you don't. And so, my day life has been, I'm a banker, I'm a commercial lender right now. And that's afforded me, the mortgage payment, the raising the family, the cars and all that other stuff that come with everyday life. And, all the while kind of pursuing the dream. And, it's happened, and I'm totally floored by it. It's taken me 20 years to get to this point. But, to all the aspiring writers out there, everyone always used to tell me, don't give up. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But, it's, if you keep at it, eventually something's going to hit. And what you don't realize is when you're writing all the books that aren't making it, you're actually honing your voice and honing your skill, and you're getting better with each one. So,
that's right.
Don't give up. And, but I always knew I wasn't going to be a starving artist. I needed a career that I could, raise a family with, because I knew that writing came naturally to me. So whatever I did in my everyday life, I knew I could always have writing to fall back on in terms of pursuing the dream and not having to necessarily go to college for it or anything like that. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Well, and a lot of people, have this weird relationship with their day job and begrudge that thing, that maybe they feel like is holding them back. And, if I could just get rid of that, then I would be free to do the thing. And I really like how you put it. You knew that you were a writer and you just needed to keep working at your craft until you got to the level that you wanted to be. And your day job afforded you, the luxury to do that. Instead of looking at it as the day job is holding me down, this thing is allowing me to take care of my family and to have that peace of mind that's not hanging over me while I pursue the thing. I think that's a really great way to look at it.
Yeah, I think not eating would hold me down more than
absolutely.
Having it.
Yeah, that's when dreams get dashed against the rocks. Is when you're 30 days in and everything is due and there's nothing to eat, and okay, maybe this was not such a great idea. So your new book is out right now, and it's doing amazing right now. It's the number, as we're recording this, the number 16 most read book on the Amazon charts. That's amazing. Congratulations. But you've talked about all of the things that you write and that you do to get to that point. How many books did you write that didn't go anywhere before What Have You Done landed?
So it's funny. The first draft of What Have You Done was written in 1998.
Wow.
And and I obviously worked on other things, put it in the drawer, worked on other things throughout the years, but I always kept coming back to What Have You Done, because I just loved the aspect of the story where, the two things that drew me to the story were the fact that you've got the brotherhood of the police department. Both characters are, with the Philadelphia Police Department. So I grew up with that brotherhood, and it really is an extended family of your blood relatives, and, they've always got each other's back, and it's a very tight-knit community. And then the extra layer on top of that is that they are actually brothers. So you've got two layers of commitment there. You've got a family bond, you've got the police bond, and, if one of the brothers suspected the other of murder, how would they handle that? Would they kind of go against everything that they're, kind of raised to do, which is protect, one another, or would they try to cover up the crime? So I always liked that idea. So, I wrote it, I'd send it out, nothing would happen. I'd put it in the drawer, write something else, come back with it, update it, what have you. I mean, over 20 years, every piece of technology that they used in 1998 are not using today. So it was always an update and kind of getting the story leaner and meaner and sending it out again and not getting anywhere and putting it back in the drawer. So, I probably wrote 6 or 7 manuscripts, in between the different versions of What Have You Done. The thing that really put me over the edge, I feel, was several years ago, the last time I took it out of the drawer, I actually hired a freelance editor who had experience in the thriller genre, and she really helped me capture what the story was missing, which was a lot of action scenes, cutting out a lot of the fat, and it really get to a point where it landed me the agent and then landed me the ultimate deal. So yeah, very grateful. But yeah, I would say, weaving in and out of the different versions of What Have You Done, probably 6 or 7 other manuscripts along the way.
I love that. I hear so many stories about people that have written the desk drawer novel, and a lot of people we write those books and just assume this is my training book. I'm going to put it away. No one's ever going to see this, and I'm going to go to the next thing. And I think that's a good idea. But so what was there just something special about this book that kept bringing you back to it? What was it about this book that made you not just say, well, this was just my training novel, I'm going to file it away, no one's ever going to see it. You must have felt that there was something different about this story.
Yeah, like I said, it was the bond between, kind of that 2 layers of bond between the fact that they were blood brothers and the fact that they were brothers within the police force. Just that, kind of that tension always brought me back in terms of, if one brother suspected the other of murder, do I cover it up for him, or do I, kind of let others know what's going on, which would, kind of almost be a 2-layered betrayal. Because you're related through blood and you're related through the police force. That's the thing that always got me reaching back into the drawer. And I always had a killer twist in mind at the end, which I love too. And I think those 2 things were definitely the things that kept me coming back to it. I don't know. There's something about it, and obviously it was meant to be because it's out and it's doing really well and the readers love it. But those were definitely the 2 elements that kept me back into the drawer for it.
Yeah. Well, it's doing really well right now. I think that's probably an understatement. As an initial book coming out like this, that has to be such a great feeling, and knowing that all of the time that you've worked on your craft up to this point has paid off, and that people are loving the book. I really can't put into words how thrilling it is that it's a 20-year journey. So many disappointments along the way. So many times I got really close and just, it didn't happen. And not only did it finally happen, but, the reader reaction is overwhelmingly positive. It's selling like hotcakes. It's really, busted out of the gates, with, rave reviews and lots of sales and, absolutely exceeding every expectation from me to my agent to the publisher. Everybody's over the moon with its performance. And, to the point where there's so much positive energy coming in through the reviews that it's kind of freaked me out for book number 2, because I really hope I meet expectations on the second one. Yeah. Because I'm really setting the bar pretty high, apparently, on the first one. That's amazing. Well, we've talked around the book, but let's talk about the book for a minute. How do you describe? And you've talked about the brotherhood and the kind of the double layer about the story. But who are the characters in this book, and how do we meet them?
So the book is about 2 brothers, Liam and Shawn Dwyer, and Liam is a forensic specialist with the Philadelphia Police Department, and Shawn is his older brother and is also a homicide detective with the same department. And they're investigating the murder of a woman that they both know. And as they're doing the individual investigations, they begin to suspect one another as the killer. So that's the real key to the whole thing. What I was saying before is kind of how, would you betray your brother? Would you betray a fellow officer? And that's the challenge that they both face as the book goes on.
When you're thinking of a story like this, what comes to you first? Is it the characters? Is it a setting? Is it maybe a plot situation? How does the story begin to unfold for you usually? So
I'm a pantser, which it's good initially, but it typically sucks in the editing section. I always start out with just a scene in my head, and I don't know. It just pops into my head. I don't know who the characters are. I don't know why they're there. I don't really know what's going on, but the scene will come into my head, and I'll kind of backtrack from there. And so by the time I'm ready, I'll have the scene and I'll think about that scene for, it could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on how quickly ideas come or as I peel back the onion, what these people are doing in the scene. But typically when I sit down to actually start writing, I'll have a general idea of why that scene is occurring. I'll have a beginning, and I think I might have the end. But I'd say 80% of the time, the killer who I think is in the end ends up being wrong. And as I write along the way, because I have no idea how I'm going to bridge the gap between that opening scene and the end, I kind of just go. And usually along the way, another character will pop up, or another, I'll take another road and discover that that's not the killer. This person is the killer. So, most of the time I'm just as surprised as the reader is when they're reading.
I love that so much. You mentioned a follow-up book. Are these the same characters? Is the story continuing? After finishing this book and the success of it, is there a temptation to continue the story?
There was no temptation. The second one is a standalone, as is the first. That's always been the case. I will say, however, that the characters in the second book could possibly become a series. I just feel like, the main character in the second book might have a little bit more to say in the future. So she might become more of a series, or at least, another book or two with that same massive characters in it. But typically, it's a standalone as of right now.
Excellent. Matthew, if someone is listening and they are new to the craft, and you've given some great advice so far about not giving up and sticking with it, but what advice would you give to someone other than that, who has the dream that you have, but is maybe just in that stage where there's potential but nothing happening?
I would say attend writers' conferences and don't be afraid to network. I have never seen a more welcoming group of people than the thriller writer community. Everybody's willing to help each other. It doesn't matter if you're, a number one New York Times bestselling author, Harlan Coben or James Patterson. They seem just as willing to help the unpublished author or the mid-list author or the debut author than they are, with friends that they've known for years. It's a very, very welcoming community. Everybody's willing to help. Everyone's willing to give advice based on their own experiences. So if you get yourself to those, writers' conferences, you don't have to go to 1,000 of them, maybe 2 or 3 a year, hang out at the bar late at night when we all come back from our, publishing dinners or whatever, and we're, meeting with each other. And don't be afraid to just walk up and start shaking hands and introducing yourself. It'll go a long way.
Fantastic advice. Matthew, the book is What Have You Done? It's available everywhere now. It's doing gangbusters. I'm going to recommend everyone go pick up their copy of it. Matthew, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, child of the jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand, either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.